The Silent Hill franchise has been known since its inception for its ambiguity in storyline, meaning that what you see on the screen is not necessarily what really happened or what you should believe. It's a game where the events are very blurred, the timeline is vague, and the meanings are basically up for you to find out. However, Silent Hill 2 specifically is where this concept goes to a completely new level, reaching a point where different players can literally disagree about what really happened in the story and how it ended. The reason for this is because this game's narrative is confusing on so many levels. You don't know the background of characters, you don't know where you really are, and you don't even get a clear idea whether anything you're seeing makes sense or not. In fact, even after completing the game multiple times, you can still find yourself with more questions than answers, especially since the creators deliberately designed the narrative to be open for interpretation. So in this video, I'm going to think out loud and talk about several theories that many fans come up with after playing the game, even though we have no way to 100% verify them. Without further ado, let's start. Many people who play Silent Hill 2 for the first time usually assume that the fog in the town is nothing more than a backdrop or environmental effect. However, once you start focusing deeply and analyzing its movements, you'll understand it's basically a character in its own right due to its active role in shaping the narrative and influencing the psychological journey. For example, in certain areas, the fog obscures paths and limits visibility on purpose, forcing James to follow specific routes instead of roaming randomly. Such behavior creates a sense of being herded by the town, as if the fog is deliberately funneling him toward revelations like the Woodside Apartments. In fact, the Book of Lost Memories describes Silent Hill Town as a place that calls people, and the fog is its primary tool for controlling movement. At first, people didn't understand what this means because it's a very vague statement. But eventually, the idea becomes very clear when they start treating fog as a living entity. Furthermore, the fog selectively reveals monsters or key locations, making it responsible for choosing what James confronts and when, much like a character manipulating events. You will also see that fog changes based on the atmosphere. In moments of psychological intensity, the fog becomes oppressive, mirroring James's mental state. But when things are a little bit safe, it moves away gradually without you even noticing it. In other words, the fog actually interacts with you as a player and controls the game's rhythm, slowing exploration with limited visibility and building dread. It's basically like a guide or mentor, but in a ghostly shape that seems inherently integrated in the environment. If you felt this during your gameplay, it really means you have strong eyes, and even though fog was initially used due to developers' limitation in technology, it pretty much was proven that it serves so many purposes.
This town, there's something wrong with it. It's kind of hard to explain, but...
Is it dangerous?
The time loop theory in Silent Hill 2 is arguably the most popular fan theory across the internet. And it's insanely intriguing because it kind of makes a lot of sense when you think about it. This theory simply suggests that James is stuck in a recurring cycle within Silent Hill, reliving events over and over until he finally comes to terms with the truth about his wife Mary and his guilt. Players came up with this theory because the multiple endings in the game seem to be related to the original storyline, but in different ways. They believe each ending represents a different run or cycle that James goes through depending on his choices and mental state. For example, the iconic letter from Mary fades away throughout the game and disappears entirely near the end, which can indicate a reset in the cycle, and the letter reappears when James starts over in each loop. Another piece of evidence supporting this theory is actually Maria herself. She dies multiple times in the game, but every time she shows up again, she has no memory of prior deaths. This can mean that her cyclical presence represents James's inability to escape his guilt, suggesting he's reliving variations of the same events over and over.
I'll be waiting.
I'll find some way to... I'll come back, I promise.
Not only that, but sometimes Maria feels like she knows information she shouldn't know, including parts of Mary's life and James's emotional triggers. In fact, in the Born from a Wish scenario, she is shown to have emotions, memories, and self-awareness before meeting James, pushing many people to assume that the town is replaying a scenario, resetting Maria to play her role in James's torment again and again. Even if we analyze the opening scene alone, we'll notice it might be supporting this theory as well. I mean, think about it. The game opens with James looking into a dirty mirror, disconnected and dazed. Symbolically, this may represent introspection or self-examination starting yet again, as if James has done this before and he's checking his flesh and face in the mirror to see if he's back in reality or not. When he opens the door, it somehow seems like he's already been through a devastating journey, and he's back to where he started. Furthermore, in the Lakeview Hotel, James watches a videotape confirming he killed his wife. But strangely enough, the tape's placement and his apparent surprise suggest he's rediscovering this truth once again. The loop theory says he represses this knowledge at the end of each cycle, only to face it again, which means the town is kind of punishing him by shocking him constantly. And as I said before, the different endings also seem to support this theory somewhat. The Leave ending, where James moves on with Laura, suggests breaking the cycle through acceptance, which is probably the only way to escape the loop. However, the In Water ending, where he dies through self-deletion by drowning, implies surrendering to guilt, potentially restarting the loop one more time. On the other hand, the Maria ending, where he leaves with Maria while she's coughing, hints at repeating his denial, as she may die like Mary, meaning he never learned his lesson and he will still suffer in an endless cycle.
Better do something about that cough.
Even the dog ending has a hidden meaning despite its comedic nature. It shows a dog controlling everything from behind the scenes, which may indicate external control over James's fate, as if he's a puppet in a repeating play and he's stuck in the same events forever. With that being said, there's one more specific evidence that I personally thought of and makes me believe the developers really intended to include a mysterious looping nightmare in the game. This evidence is none other than PT itself, the notorious Silent Hill game that never saw the light of day. What many people don't know about PT is that it was actually inspired in part by Silent Hill 2, both thematically and tonally. In PT, you play a mysterious man seemingly dealing with guilt and trauma because he supposedly killed his own wife and kids during a moment of rage. This is basically what James's journey is all about in Silent Hill 2, due to his inability to forgive himself after killing his wife Mary and the beginning of his hallucinations. But the catch in PT is that the protagonist is stuck in a looping hallway with increasingly disturbing visuals, which keep you going through an endless nightmare where your trauma intensifies with each cycle. Silent Hill distorts reality to highlight James's psyche, and PT does the same with its surreal, repeating corridors and progressively strange reality. So the looping idea might not have really started with PT, but it's probably the original concept in Silent Hill 2 that was simply used in a much more subtle way, keeping you confused about its existence. Even though there are multiple counter-arguments by many fans, The time loop theory remains the most widely believed in the game's history, especially since the developers never tried to debunk it, and they probably know there's some truth to it.
Why do you keep running away from me? And how do you know about Mary?
I just do. What's the big deal?
If there's one aspect in the game that everyone agrees is especially ambiguous, it has to be the timeline, specifically when events actually took place. This uncertainty has led many players to question exactly when the game begins and what happened immediately beforehand. As a result, some players concluded that James killed Mary shortly before the game began and had her body in the trunk of his car, which he drove to Silent Hill. This kind of makes sense, because even though Mary's letter confused James into thinking she died 3 years ago, this is not really confirmed, and James's memories suggest she was alive recently.
Mary died of that damn disease 3 years ago. Is she really alive?
So, instead of dealing with the aftermath of his crime, it is possible that he left her body hidden in the trunk while his psyche fragmented during those moments, leading him to a psychological journey toward confronting what he'd done. I mean, let's imagine the scenario together. James killed his wife by smothering her in a moment of desperation. He then went through a state of panic, and he ended up putting her body in the car to get rid of it somewhere. Subsequently, Toluca Lake was the perfect location for disposing of the body, but just before doing it, he went to a secluded restroom nearby to have a moment alone and try to comprehend what he had just done, which explains his shock and how he looks in the mirror as if he's not recognizing himself. Keep in mind that the game never clearly states what James did with Mary's body, and for some reason we never see the trunk, and James seems to avoid going back to the car. And once again, the endings can help us get some evidence, because the in-water ending shows James driving the car into the lake, possibly with Mary's body in the trunk. He also appears to look at something behind, which may indicate he chose to die with Mary's remains because he couldn't resist the regret anymore.
I know this isn't what you would want, but I guess it doesn't matter anymore. You're not here. Are you?
And by the way, during interviews, the developers literally gave some hints, indicating that James's denial supports the idea that he's carrying physical evidence of his crime. So Mary's body being in the car is very possible, and this is why many people say that In Water is the most appropriate ending.
I miss you so much. I am sorry. I am so sorry.
And believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, after more than 20 years of players keeping this theory alive in their minds, it was basically confirmed in the remake. Because even though the body wasn't in the trunk, it was officially revealed that it was in the backseat the whole time. So the scenario I mentioned earlier is very close to what the developers had in their minds, proving that we, as players, should always fill the blanks using our own brains while playing this game. Silent Hill 2 is known for having very interesting and confusing characters, but there's one specific person in the game who feels relatable, and this person is none other than Angela. She's a 19-year-old girl that you meet in the first section of your playthrough, but just like James, she seems lost, scared, and unable to understand why the town is so nightmarish. Angela is also mentally unstable and emotionally devastated due to her memories of her family, mainly because her father and brother took advantage of her body in a horrible way. And you know what I mean. As a result, she eventually finds herself in Silent Hill Town. But similar to James, she sees a completely distorted version of the place, representing her trauma and fears.
It's hard to see with this fog, but there's only the one road. You can't miss it.
She even sees specific monsters related to her psychology, such as Abstract Daddy, which is essentially meant to reflect her abusive father and her suffering with him. However, Angela does not experience this nightmare exclusively because of what happened to her, but also because of her own guilt and regret due to what she did. In case you don't know, there's evidence that Angela probably killed her father by stabbing him multiple times in a moment of desperation or rage, making her extreme reaction very similar to James's. Although this detail is not explicitly mentioned, you can still find a newspaper article that talks about her father being stabbed in a murder of passion, meaning that a family member is the murderer. Apparently, Angela could not comprehend her action, and she started living in denial, shown through her fragmented memory and evasive conversations. Besides sharing a similar psyche to James's, she also shares the same thinking when it comes to escaping mental pain, which is seeing death as the only solution. In her final scene, she ends up on a staircase engulfed in flames while having an incredibly painful conversation with James, before moving away to end her story very tragically.
Don't pity me. I'm not worth it. Or maybe you think you can save me? Will you love me? Care for me? Heal all my pain?
Angela in this scene is clearly talking about how desperate she is to have the loving father she never had. Her painful past, along with her regret, led her to Silent Hill Town, where she decided to confront her emotions, but she was never successful.
You see it too?
This is very close to James's fate during the in-water ending, which proves that Silent Hill Town is a place where people come to face their trauma and guilt, but sometimes they simply lose the battle inside it. So Angela is basically the female version of James to a certain extent, and even if you check small details like her hands, you'll notice that her bitten nails indicate her struggle to cope with what she's been through.
If we stick together, we might just make it out of here.
Out of where?
This town. Silent Hill.
For decades, many players loudly made so many arguments about how Maria is meant to represent James's intimate desires and the version of his wife that he romantically wanted to have in his life. However, if we go even further to analyze the purpose of Maria's existence, we'll see another side to her personality. I mean, of course Maria dresses provocatively and speaks in a seductive way to highlight James's lust, but deep down, she also represents the part of Mary that James literally hated. In other words, Maria is basically the dark version of Mary that James's mind resented, even though she looks appealing at first. Keep in mind that despite her beauty and friendly tone in certain parts, Maria in the game is also shown to be obnoxious and naggy, and she torments James with bizarre phrases, showing how she's angry at him or how she's complaining about his behavior.
Anyway? What do you mean, anyway? You don't sound very happy to see me. I was almost killed back there. Why didn't you try to save me?
This is relatable because Mary's attitude towards James during her illness was a huge reason behind his anger, leading to his eventual snap. She used to complain a lot about his behavior and lack of care, especially when his mental state fell apart and he started relying more on alcohol. Even if you pay attention to Maria's statements, you'll notice how provocative they are for James and how they remind him of something he wishes to forget. For example, she says stuff like, "Do I look like your girlfriend?" which is clearly intended to mock his inability to let go and how she knows very well that he sees Mary in her.
Do I look like your girlfriend?
No, my late wife.
She also says, "You couldn't care less about me," echoing Mary's suffering in her final days, and how James saw her as a burden on his shoulders.
You couldn't care less about me, could you?
On one side, she's portraying the helpless state of Mary and crying for James to take care of her. But on the other side, she becomes very mean and selfish and even mocks James's inability to act like a real man.
Yeah, Maria, give me a hand here.
Come on. You're supposed to be the big man around here. How's a little girl like me supposed to help?
At first, this might seem like she's a total mess, and she's reflecting random emotions to trigger James. However, that's probably not the case, because Maria's character is actually consistent, but she's simply highlighting different attitudes of Mary, or at least, the attitudes that James didn't love at all. Although Maria physically is obviously what James wished Mary could have been, her presence still serves as a punishment for James, because she gradually becomes everything he hated. She argues with him a lot, she criticizes his weakness, she complains about his absence, and she wants him to take care of her at all costs. To keep it short, Maria is essentially the version of Mary that James's mind created before killing her. His alcoholism and depression led him to exaggerate Mary's attitude during her illness, which eventually convinced him that his lovely wife became toxic and unbearable.
The truth is, I hated you. I wanted you out of the way. I wanted my life back.
Maria's repeated deaths also symbolize James's inability to forget his wife, meaning that he's haunted by his crime no matter where he goes. And as usual, the game slightly proves this theory in the Maria ending, when she starts coughing and portraying a form of illness. But James still shows no care, as if he never learned his lesson. So in summary, guys, Silent Hill 2 was never meant to be straightforward in its story or narrative. The creators intentionally made it this way, and left everything open for interpretation because they wanted the players to create their own lore where so many possibilities can be true. In fact, a video about all the theories can be hours long because you can always find a clue or a mysterious side in the game that leads to a completely separate scenario. Please give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and let me know in the comments below about your own theories or if you disagree with the ones I mentioned. See you next time.
What?
I won't let you do this to me. I won't let you go. I can't!